Hello, welcome back to another interview about handmade music. Today I'm joined by Kevin Murphy, who is a fantastic celloist who was part of some of the performances of Handmade not too long ago, just before the summer. Before Kevin, we had a lot of rain and a lot of sunshine all at the same time. And he's also from Blind Stitch Music. Kevin, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Richard. Thanks very much.
So Kevin, handmade music is this new kind of thing that SARC and Move On Music and ourselves are trying to push forward, this new kind of experimental music night. What kind of attracted you to perform and be a part of it?
Well, I was doing a gig in the Duncairn as Blind Stitch, and Moving On Music were promoting that. So they asked me, would I do this? I'd never heard of it before, and I was really into the idea because I was told nothing could be finished. You might write new music for it, but part of it would be that I would be at least partly improvising on the night, just based on some ideas that I had. So yeah, I mean, that's something that I don't do as much now, but I used to do a lot of before, and I do enjoy the whole, scary Mary thing of you start, people are looking at you, you don't know where it's going to go. There's a kind of a massive rush from that to try and see if you can pull it off. So that's why I was very happy to give it a lash, and I had a brilliant time. I really, really enjoyed it now, I have to say, and it's kind of reinvigorated a desire to do more stuff like that for me. So
Yeah,
that's how that happened. Yeah.
so for those who may not have come across Blind Stitch and you yourself, Kevin Murphy, tell us a little bit about your work and as a little kind of introductory to who you are, where you've come from, what inspires you, what excites you about what you're doing at the moment.
All right. Well, I've been around for a while, so that's kind of a difficult thing to put. I mean, I've been in bands since the later 1980s. I was like as a session player, I've played with a huge amount of different people. I was in a band, The Interference, a long, long time ago. I played in Gavin Friday band for a couple of years. Again, doing lots of other session work as well. I had a band called Igloo, which was sort of an electronic band in the late 1990s.
What's kind of driven you from project to project? Why one band versus another? Is it just the natural ebb and flow of different groups as they form and play and move on, or has there been a through line of what's inspired you as you've gone from piece to piece?
Um,
And it might just be an organic through line of just
yeah,
life.
well, I mean, I think so. I mean, again, I mean, it's probably easier for me to talk about the last 10 years or something like that, but because to get to that point, I'm not really too sure. I think it was more bouncing off things. This sounds good. I like this. I'll go with that. I think, yeah, from about the year 2000, I kind of stopped playing because I didn't stop. I was writing away, but I wasn't performing. I wasn't pursuing anything career-wise. I went off and did an academic thing, and I still do that. Um, but I suppose I started taking it back up more seriously with a band called Steady the First, which was an experimental instrumental band in around 2010 or something like that. I think we released our first record in 2012, and that was myself and a guy called Thomas Hall. And funnily enough, I've just maybe started doing something with him again, but that was. I mean, it was driven by a lot of things, but I mean, the whole thing is that it's not too driven by anything. You just want to do your own thing. Funnily enough, actually, I was doing a lot of session work. Thomas would played in some of those bands as well, and he was always intrigued by the stuff that I was doing in sound checks, just messing around. Because I remember him saying, "See all that stuff? Let's make an album of all that stuff." and I suppose it never really struck me. Well, nobody's got really like it's just that's farting around. And so we turned that into a record, and that really did well down here. And so that's me playing the cello with another cello player, Mary Barnacle, and that as well. A nickel harper player called Aki, and Thomas plays drums, loads of zithers, marxophone, and electronics. So that was my kind of re-entry, maybe 13 years ago or something like that. So again, like the thinking behind it, I'm not a great theoretical framework person, which I'm sure coming with certain people from the SARC probably would be able to articulate this in a far more coherent manner. That what I just got up in the morning to do, there's probably a codified theoretical reasoning behind it or something. But it for me is just doing what I want to do. And that band, we did 2 albums. Well, generally through all of this, I'm also doing kind of session stuff. Anyway, that moved on to another band called Slow Moving Clouds, which was a traditional band, an experimental traditional band. The nickel harper player, I don't know if you know what a nickel harp is or have seen one. If you haven't, it's worth a look. They're amazing. I think it's a Swedish instrument. He's Finnish, but it's a Swedish instrument. It's like a key fiddle. It's about, that size. It's not huge, but you wear like a guitar, but it's got keys and strings and sympathetic strings, and it makes a really amazing sound. So he played me a few Finnish tunes one day, and I said, all right, we have to have a band based on this. Again, I wasn't searching the world for Finnish music, but when it slapped me in the face, it was like, let's definitely do that anyway. And so there was an Irish fiddle player as well, and so was Irish Finnish. And I suppose I was bringing the kind of oddness to it. You're trying to put, maybe influences like Arvo Part or even darker stuff like who's that guy? What's his name? Can't remember his name now.
But with Arvo Part,
so
say that again. Sorry.
Hats and Cloak. So that sort of blissful, but really dark. My job was to bring that to what the 2 lads are doing with trad fiddle and Finnish nickel. Finnish tunes.
With people like Arvo Part, is it the simplicity of the score of the work that kind of inspires? What is it that you draw inspiration from for your own music, and other artists, of course, but other places as well? What brought those kind of things?
Those 2 actually, I mentioned Arvo Part and what's his name, Hats and Cloak. They're not alike at all, but to me, those would be. Hats and Cloak is, I suppose, you can compare him a bit to that guy, that Mark, the guy who did the soundtrack for the Lighthouse. Really low down, as in sonically low down, lots of double bass, tuned down, really getting down as far as possible. So I'm into that idea on most of those records we had, as well as cello. There's always double bass. But then on the other hand, then the Arvo Part things is a different thing that I'm drawn to, I suppose. So as much atmosphere as possible. But yeah, it's like the simple melodies that just seem almost like childlike or whatever, but are like absolutely killer. Not easy to. In some ways, some musical students must look at some Arvo Part things and go like, I could have done that when I was 13 or something like that, and that it's not technically. But it is what it is. It's got a profound effect upon people.
Yeah. It's what people say about the Beatles. They use the same kind of chords in the early days, but no one could put those chords together quite like the Beatles did. Arvo Part has that simplicity but the depth of simplicity, I suppose, is what comes to mind for me. Anytime I've ever listened to him. The kind of thing I don't know if we've really touched on yet is your music. So you're a celloist primarily, or is there many different things that you dip into?
No, cello player primarily now. Yeah. So I mean, yeah, like setting first would have been my stuff with my music with Thomas. In some cases, it have been me interpreting his music, but and the same in some cases with Slumming Clouds. Blind Stitch is it's kind of more song based. Well, very much so. Um, Again, I hadn't come across that many people who had played the cello while singing. I mean, they're out there for sure. There's a lot more now. Um, but all those other influences that I've just been talking about, I was just trying to see, okay, contemporary songs to a certain extent. Can I lash all that into one voice in the cello? Um, so again, I tried to channel that through. I mean, I had been in the way I'd been writing before. I was always kind of developing ideas with in the back of my head, thinking, I can put string parts over that, or that will sound brilliant. But I wanted to do something that was just one voice, one instrument. That could I entertain people, for want of a better word, for an hour. And I thought that that took me a long time to be trial and error. And no, I like to do that. I don't like to do that. So that took a couple of years to develop. And
And
so
what made you kind of pick up the cello in the first place? Was it it's
uh,
one of these things where the parents kind of threw you in one direction, or there's
totally.
one instrument left in the classroom, or is
That's
it?
exactly what it was. I come from a family of eight. It was eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Your man gets the cello, and I hated it as a kid. I mean, it was not a cool instrument to have as a small boy. So, and yeah, like my siblings had many played fiddles. At least they could play a bit of trad or something, which people would then think, well, you're not a complete weirdo, because young kids don't like hearing classical music. So, but anyway, I'd say I packed it up when I was about 12. It's like 3 or 4 grades. And I took it up again when I had left Cork, moved to Dublin, joining bands. And yeah, for very fickle and shallow reasons, I realized that actually the cello is pretty cool now. So, and well, I'd like to think it was more than that, but that's what I remember anyway. And I just dived into as many bands as possible that would let me play the cello, because I just found it really hard to practice on my own. I mean, the world is different now. There's all sorts of things you could do to play along with the cello, things on the internet. But back in those days, it was you, the instrument, and what am I going to do now? So I played in as many bands as possible just to keep playing. At the time, nobody was playing the cello in a kind of rock sense or avant-garde sense, or definitely not in a trad sense in Dublin at that time. So it was kind of a unique thing.
Yeah, it gave you an immediate identity and an opportunity to explore, I suppose,
Yeah,
because of that uniqueness. Yeah, unique timing if no one else was using it.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Uh,
So yeah, that's why I don't have a story of seeing somebody playing the cello once and saving up all my pocket money because God damn it, I want to play that instrument one day. I'm going to show them all. I resisted, I resented, and then I eventually relinquished control
yeah.
over destiny.
But I think that. I mean, yeah, people love their origin stories, but at the same time, I think we can identify more with the person who is forced to do something, because we've most of us, when you're lucky enough, got that similar experience where you had an instrument foisted upon you as a child,
Mm.
and then had that experience of absolutely hating it. But the fact that you're able to discover it and also take advantage of the fact that you actually had it, that skill, I think is and take it into the places that you've managed to take it, which into this glorious sound that you have, I think is a really lovely story that I think we can all identify with in lots of ways.
Good. I usually think it's a very unromantic story, but anyway, fuck it, that's the story.
Yeah, well, people are too obsessed with their romantic stories. They're artists who have been beating their head against a brick wall to create a sculpture is not necessarily reality. As much as we love the barons of the kind of that kind of story of fated love and death for your art. So we've both used the term kind of experimental a couple of times in this little chat. what is experiment? Experimental is a word that often gets used to cover a heck of a lot. So what is experimental for you, and what you're kind of trying to do or exploring at the moment with different bands and in different ways? What is the experiment?
I don't know. I mean, in some cases, it's just you sit down in a room and you force yourself to do something you haven't done before. To me, that's kind of experimental because you're not, I want to write a piece of music. Oh, I'm feeling now that the normal stuff that I'm hitting notes and I'm, this, you have that conversation with yourself, even though it's incredibly abstract. And it's trying to ignore the messages that you're getting to get new messages by. I mean, a lot of the time I record as I go. I don't know how I'd be without that, man. I've become really addicted to that idea of just with the phone, forcing yourself to do something that you're not comfortable with, but then having a listen back. Um, so, I mean, I suppose there's that. The experimentation in terms of trying to force yourself out of the pathways to creativity that you're used to, which is going for different notes, the dissonant chords, seeing is it dissonant? Maybe if you put something else in, it's not actually. There's something there. Whatever it is, forcing yourself out of your comfort zone. I mean, I don't know. The band that I have, Slow Moving Clouds, are kind of funny because we're definitely deemed to be experimental in that you have Finnish music, you have Irish music, and then you have this whatever it is that dark, whatever Arab party, hats and cloak type treatment. So therefore, it's experimental because you're just adding one bit to another bit. In a way, that doesn't seem that experimental to me. It seems actually kind of easy. It's more of a collage or something like that. But it gets called that, and I don't care if people want to call it that.
Is it helpful? I mean, I kind of find, as I said, kind of the word experimental, you get a lot of people lumping a lot of things into it rather than, exploring the fact that it's music and we're trying to, reach people with it. Is it a helpful term, or is it because you kind of just, as you just said, you don't kind of use it in that kind of way?
Well, it kind of is useful if I hear there's an experimental something band, an experimental trad band. I'd be interested to see, all right, what are they doing? It's experimental, it's different, or whatever. Like I think Lankum call themselves an experimental folk band or an experimental trad band, and I think that label fits. It is folk and trad, but it's definitely taking it off in an odd direction. So, even when I was describing how it's attached to the band that I'm in, Slow Moving Clouds, I don't find it that experimental, but I don't really care. I do think it's kind of useful that people will expect what they get to a certain extent. I mean, the experimental thing, I have noticed, like, I remember about 10 years ago, a composer who was experimental being very popular, and then me noticing that a whole circle around that composer were kind of mimicking that composer, but also calling themselves experimental. And it used to crack me up laughing. I thought it was hilarious. Like, how is it experimental if you're copying the experimental person? So again, I don't mean that in a kind of a bitchy way, but it's just, well, yeah, it's, whoa. I mean, it's useful because like going to that accidental theatre that night, and then I was playing with the orchestra, or I wasn't playing, but I was watching them. I mean, that was fucking insane what they were doing. In different rooms, and half the audience was over here. I mean, that's definitely experimental.
Yeah, it's hard to not call that experimental because it lacks maybe another term to try and define it.
Yeah. No, I mean, I love that. Like, but yeah, sometimes I think it can be a bit of a crutch that people hide behind as well sometimes. But I mean, if you get into that, you end up slagging someone. I don't want to do that either. Like, it's just, I'm definitely not, at the moment I am working on a new trad thing, but it's definitely experimental trad. And like some of the stuff we're doing, like, would horrify, like properly horrify the lovers of traditional music. There's no doubt about
Yeah.
that. And some of it they would really like, I would say.
And
But I
can
mean,
you give
I
us a
think,
taste of what that means? When you're sitting down to experiment, or you're sitting down to work, what does it mean to try? What are you thinking about? You're trying to bring in different influences that aren't usual, or you're letting the music kind of lead where that experiment goes.
yeah, that's the question I'm asking myself now at the moment a lot, because I'm working with one person in particular, and we're bouncing around some, but it's just, well, actually, in that case, I mean, because it's trad, right? There's going to be songs and there's going to be tunes. Writing brand new tunes that aren't in the trad thing, I mean, that's a bit weird. So we're just starting with tunes, but I don't bring the tune to this guy. I put a kind of melodic world around that tune, and he's kind of better, much better than I am, being experimental, for want of a better word. And so to a certain extent, I bring him this. He listens to it, but he doesn't know what the tune is. So he's taken my bass idea and throwing it around, and then we'll bring it back to the tune and see, okay, how can that interact with that again?
Are you
Uh,
doing that in the same space at the same time, or are you sending something to him that then he thinks about and works
And
on?
the sending, yeah, sending, or I'm there, physically there, but not telling what the tune is, just working on the backing and seeing how he reinterprets the backing.
Hmm. Is
So, I
that
mean, that's kind of that. I would say that I would call that experimental. Just you're trying new methods of taking something and seeing what happens, and definitely the outcome is definitely going to be something that hasn't been there before. So,
yeah? It's just an interesting line between the normal artistic creation process, which often does look for different influences and bring them in, and where does the line become experimental for this kind of
yeah,
thing? It's because the idea that most musicians will often think, and other artists will think, that their work is new, because we don't often, as an industry, like to repeat ourselves too often, because
yeah,
then you start to feel stale. So it occurs to me, just because the handmade music is an experimental music night, that word experiment often does a lot of heavy lifting, and it's just an interesting thing just to delve into. Well, what does that actually mean for you as an artist when you're sitting down and working?
yeah.
um,
I mean, I have to say that trad music, especially, really. I mean, it's the enemy in some way of experimentation, and some people take that, especially in the Irish trad world, take that quite seriously. It's like
mm,
you can't be. This is a heritage thing, it's a cultural thing. There is an
mm,
arty element to it, but it's not art, or maybe. So, well, besides the politics, it's the mad idea. Your initial idea is already there. You go up to the shelves and go, I'll have that one. What'll we do with that one now? But it's already ready made, so um, it kind of resists a change by its very very notion. It's supposed to be something that you pass on as you got it, and you pass it on again as you got it. Although in reality, that just simply never happens. And from what I know more and more about Irish trad music, we understand Irish trad music with most of the tunes that we've collected over the last 200 years. But I mean, there's wealth of stuff before that as well that's different, and so therefore the stuff that we consider to be trad in some ways taking the piss out of the stuff that predated this as well. So this idea that chunks are just handed down exactly is kind of nonsense too. I think
mm. Really
that's my.
interesting. So to kind of lead us out, what other things have you got coming up that we want to kind of throw people to? What are you working on? What you want to tell people about?
I don't know. It's kind of a weird time. I'm actually taking a bit of a break. Um, I have been working on a full-on electronic thing again with the cello and a drummer who's created an electronic kit for himself. So that's called Isle of, as in AISLE, Isle of Night. Um, but we haven't really started. We've done a couple of gigs, but we haven't. I'll have to get back to that in a couple of months. Um, yeah, Blind Stitch still exists in some shape or form, Slum and Clouds in some shape or form, but I am trying to look into a kind of a more solo trad experimental thing with this other guy. I don't know what we're going to call it. So beyond that, that's probably something I should be plugging. I can't remember. That's about it.
Well, if for people to keep an eye out for Blind Stitch music on the socials and things like that, and Kevin Murphy cello on the website and other places. I'm sure they will find some interesting things in those places, Kevin.
Yeah, for sure.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much for joining us. Handmade music is every month, so come along, join in the experiment as much as that I've started to rip apart that word and see what it's all about. Thanks very much.